I had always been a conventional fisherman since as long as I could remember, only ever fishing on shore at a lake or at the riverbanks. That was until last year when an old friend of mine introduced me to ice fishing. Despite living in the upper Midwest my whole life, it never crossed my mind to freeze yourself off for some fish. Catching the fish was the bonus, but what got me really hooked on was when I got introduced to a magnificent beast of a machine we call a track sled. Ice fishing was already a new hobby for me, but a small machine on ice? That was a game changer. I needed my own. I didn't have any serious cash to buy one on the spot, but fortunately, my old Sears snowblower I found on the side of the road finally gave out prior to the late season. I had the idea of repurposing it and giving it a new life, and so I began my research. Luckily enough, it was pretty common for old snowblowers to become new machines from the videos I've seen and threads I've read. So at least I had a concept to work with. It was time to brainstorm and make this work. The first goal of this build was portability, making sure this machine can be hauled behind small vehicles such as a sedan or possibly a compact car, like taking a lawnmower ice fishing. The next goal is to make it compact, small and light, as well as making it easy to hold necessities such as tools, rods, and much more. That also carries on to making it strong and able to haul at least another passenger or for a loaded solo trip with balanced speed and strength ratios. And finally, making sure the build is as simple as possible, meaning easy to fix, easy to build, and easy access to parts with universal fitments. With my grinder and saw, I started cutting up the old snowblower to get its box frame. This also helped me get a good visual idea of the build. After brainstorming some ideas of the main frame, with my old trusty Chicago-made flux core welder, amateur welding skills, and 1-inch square tubing, I began fabricating a main frame to support the box frame. I found these tracks sold online and customized the frames based on the axle design. Eventually I ended up with a rectangle cross brace frame design. This design was based on the consideration of needing to add a counterweight at the front end to balance out the engine weight when mounting it to the main frame. For the engine, I went with a replica 420cc Temu engine and a cheap Amazon torque converter. I started getting fitment ideas by placing the engine on the box frame itself. The old engine hole in main frame was perfectly centered, so that meant the engine would have to be positioned more towards the right of the box frame. This is so I can have some clearance for the chain to connect the CVT to the main drive axle. With some slight fabrication to an engine mount I got off Amazon, I was able to fit the engine on the frame perfectly with enough clearance for the chain. Bolting the engine down and adjusting the chain to fit, this is what the overall drivetrain will look like. With another Amazon find, I found these bump stops and made a mounting bracket that would bolt right onto the old snowblower's wheel bracket. It would rest right on the drive tracks and support the rear weight, keeping it upright, as well as added suspension for bumps and support for inclines. I went ahead and went back to work on the main frame, adding a caliper bracket, a 1.25 tow hitch receiver, and reinforced the structural welds on the frame. I promised that my welds get better, as this project definitely allowed me to hone down and refine my welding capabilities. Soon realizing that a chain tensioner was crucial, as there isn't much space to move the engine without offsetting many things. With scrap pieces and a cheap kit I found online, I included that to the main frame as well. With the old Sears box frame, I welded on some structural support as well as making it a bit sleek and aerodynamic as much as possible. I then finished it off with a nice black finish. After measuring the battery space, I went ahead and finished the main frame with a cage to secure the battery. I then concluded this with a nice black rubberized coating. Furthermore, I added on the chain tensioner and began working on the handlebar and steering section of the project. I then added a brake kit I found off Amazon, as well as testing out the clearances and adjusting it to fit flush. After that was settled, I went ahead and reassembled the project, adding the brake line and fluid to see how well the brakes can handle all the added weight. After some assembly, it was starting to come out looking a bit nicer. I soon then started cutting out some plastic panels to cover up the frame, as well as making a skid plate and battery cover. Right afterwards, I welded on and bolted a fender to counterweight the engine. This was simply 3 pieces of steel plates pieced together. The right fender was a temporary add-on, but it was simply just a sheet of aluminum folded 2 ways to replicate the left fender. Essentially, this build was done for the cheapest possible outcome. The last steps here was just to weld on the handlebar and add more counterweight to the left fender and you would be set, but I wanted to do just a bit more to it. I went ahead and upgraded the valve cover to a billet one, just so the engine can run a bit cooler when operating. It also had a few additional ports that would come in handy in the future. For the extra space on the top left fender, I had the idea of upgrading the fuel tank to increase its capabilities. So I found an aluminum fuel tank off eBay that would fit just fine without hindering anything. I also began fabricating a bracket to hold it in place, as well as adding rubber support to minimize vibration. With the bracket and tank all bolted up, I painted it with a nice black finish. After figuring out the hose diagram, I found a perfect spot to mount an ATV pulse pump to give fuel to the carburetor. Also, in case I didn't mention it before, I went with a custom short exhaust pipe and muffler to redirect the heat. These were perfect for the build, and I also found these parts sold on eBay. With a bit of trial and error, I went back to work on the drive axle and messed around with different gear ratios. I began placing new welds on another drive axle as the splines on the old one began to deteriorate due to a small mistake that I've made. While not as costly, it still sucks. But on the bright side, I get to see my welds improve while redoing this project. I went ahead and made a longer bump stop bracket alongside a detachable stabilizer bar. Since the entire frame rests on these bump stops, I eventually noticed it sitting a bit lower than what I intended. This new piece will raise it a bit so the engine could sit more centered. Upgrading the battery was the next step. Since the goal was to make it as portable as possible, I needed to shear some weight off of the build without changing anything drastically. Upgrading to a lithium battery not only took off 10 pounds, but also increased the amp hour usage for whatever electrical that will be hooked on. With some more Amazon finds, I fabricated a bracket and installed these light bars. I had the two small ones installed to the sides and the longer one pointing straight ahead. With the fuse box installed and a bit of wiring, we had working lights. The fuse box was installed right below the battery behind the skid plate. There was more than enough clearance for wires, and I was able to create a harness from the fuse box to the operating switches attached to the handlebar. With an LED display wired in, I can now see how much battery was left as well as the live voltage when operating the lights. Alongside the light switches, I also added an engine kill switch for precautionary measures. While I was not too satisfied with the previous fender designs, I went ahead and went back to work on it. This new design made it lighter, more easy on the eyes, and easier to accessorize. This made it much more simpler to add tool holders and bolt-ons to equip a shovel and ice auger onto the little machine without hindering anything. While switching between projects, I eventually started working on a cargo carrier and began fabricating a custom hitch that exceeded the stock one for my car. After careful design and specs, it was finally possible to travel with the machine. With the current design, other than slight rubs on curbside bumps, I made a 4-hour total trip to and back without any issues. In between the trip that I took the track sled to, I was able to finally test its capabilities. With an old dolly, steel plates, and some old scooter tires, I was able to weld together a trailer for some on-road and off-road activities. While quite happy with the overall results, I eventually ran into some costly issues and realized something during this test run. I've always been skeptical but never dove deep into it. While this is my first ever build, I guess we learn from our mistakes. My mistake was installing the wrong torque converter, but yet again, I went back to work. Finally getting my hands on the correct 40 series CVT as well as a few more things to design a bracket to hold it in place. Eventually I made it work, although now because it is exponentially larger than the wrong one, it hindered a few things such as the fuel tank bracket, which meant more redesigning. After measuring, cutting, and welding again, I completed it with just enough clearance for the CVT to operate normally. This design will work for now. If it was one other big thing I had issues with this build, it was a counterweight issue. To my knowledge, this was a common issue with most snowblower builds. To fix that, I made a counterweight arm with an aluminum basket to hold more cargo. Although not shown on here, the basket does fold upwards as well and is held in by a small hitch pin for easy transport. With the added leverage, not only did this improve traction, it reduced kickback tremendously. Acceleration had never been smoother. Next up was more body panels and mud flaps. Although the metal fenders kept most of the dirt away from the important things, stuff was still flying towards the legs. Installing these solved that issue. With the bodywork being done, I think I've captured the overall right idea. My issue now was just how simple it looked, even though simple was the overall plan for this build. Then I thought, why not make some carbon fiber panels? And so that's what I did. Although not my best work, it definitely brightened the look a bit. Something about the carbon fiber design that just seems to catch my eye. Not to mention that it is a bit lighter and far more durable than the molded pieces of plastic I had on before. With a bit of polish and refinishing, the body panels were set. It was also at this moment that I debuted and confirmed this project as the Wolverine Claws. With more refining touches, I swapped out the old bump stops with spring-loaded shocks. This stabilized things a whole lot more and seemed like a more permanent solution. This included with new brackets welded in and a larger spring put in place centered between the box frame and the lower handlebar. This stiffened control and recoil as well. Eventually, the pillow block design for the CVT had to be scrapped. Unfortunately, over time, vibrations caused misalignment and would seize the driven pulley. A plate would have to be used. When installing this plate, be sure to also install the correct rated bearings for your shaft. A dual idler or chain tensioner pulley bracket would then be put in place to keep the chain locked in. Eventually, the final design would come down to a rubber and sprocket idler pulley. The sprocket would be a crucial component to keeping the CVT's outer rim from being chewed up from the rotating chain. Finally, figuring out the drive issue and hopefully putting that chapter to a close, I touched things up by studying the tracks with some cold cutters. I also went ahead and cut up some ABS pipes and made some custom rod holders to the front cargo basket. This opens and folds up nicely for some quick action out on the ice. With the bit of space I had under the fuel tank, I was able to bolt a steel tube bracket. This allowed me to attach some rhino grips, which would then be the primary placement for the ice auger. Definitely a more secure and better upgrade. With all that being said, the only thing left to do was design a tow and receiver hitch for my sled. After some polish, prime, and finish, we were finally ready to go. In the 10 months of continuous trial and error, I bring you the Wolverine Claws, or Claws for short. It is January 29, 2026, a perfect day with no wind, and it's my first time out on the ice this season. The goal was to let it rip and drill a hole in the ice. We did just that. That is all I have for now. If you enjoyed watching this build, throw a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Until next time.